Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we get into the details, especially for you, as you tackle current affairs for your UPSC preparation. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some key developments from May 30, 2025. This is part one for today. We've got quite a stack of sources covering a real mix of recent news and findings, and you might even spot a couple of topics we've touched on before, which is great. It's a good chance to reinforce that knowledge and see it maybe in a slightly different light.
Exactly. Our mission here is pretty straightforward. Unpack the source material you've got, pull out the really important bits, the surprising facts, the crucial context, potential links, and help you get up to speed thoroughly and hopefully efficiently.
Okay, let's jump right in then. There's been quite a bit of noise recently about the union minister instructing e-commerce companies to do a self-audit, basically to get rid of something called dark patterns. It sounds a bit sinister. What exactly are these dark patterns?
Right, so think of dark patterns, based on what the sources say, as deliberate design choices on a website or an app. They're specifically crafted to sort of nudge or even manipulate users into doing things they might not have intended, like maybe buying an extra item or signing up for something recurring, or even just sharing more data than they realized. The term itself, it was actually coined way back in 2010 by a user experience designer, Harry Brignall. And how they work is, well, they exploit how our brains work, our cognitive biases, our tendency to just click the big obvious button, our impatience, things like that. Sometimes subtle, sometimes really quite aggressive.
So it's not just bad design, it's actually intentional manipulation.
Precisely. That's the key difference. They can be subtle or, quite forceful. And you see them pretty much everywhere online now: retail, travel sites, health platforms, social media. The sources give some classic examples. Sneaking items into your basket without you noticing, or making it super easy to accept all cookies but like a maze to figure out how to reject them, or hiding extra costs until the very last step of checkout. These aren't mistakes. They're calculated choices designed to benefit the company, often, at the user's expense.
That does feel really unfair. So are they actually illegal here in India?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. The legal side is still kind of evolving. There isn't one single law called, the Dark Patterns Act or anything like that in India. The challenge under the existing Consumer Protection Act of 2019, which does ban unfair trade practices, is often proving the specific intent to deceive and the harm caused, and that the design itself was the deceptive part, especially in these fast digital interactions. But, and this is important, the Department of Consumer Affairs did put out specific guidelines back in November 2023. These guidelines actually listed 13 specific types of dark patterns, and they stated very clearly that using any of those specific patterns amounts to a misleading advertisement or an unfair trade practice or a violation of consumer rights under that existing 2019 Act.
Okay, so maybe not a brand new standalone law, but the government has defined these practices and explicitly tied them to existing consumer protection rules. So the big takeaway for you is that regulators are definitely zeroing in on the ethics of digital design, recognizing how easily people can be swayed online. This ties right into digital governance, consumer rights, and that whole tech economy intersection.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, moving from the digital world to the physical environment. There's been some concerning news right off India's coast. Beaches down in Kerala have seen these tiny plastic pellets washing up after a vessel apparently sank nearby. These things are called nurdles.
Nurdles. That's a new one on me in this context. What exactly are they?
So nurdles are basically the raw material for almost all plastic products. They're these small, uniform, kind of preformed pellets of plastic resin, usually about, say, 1 millimeter to 5 millimeters across. Technically, they are a type of primary microplastic. They're made from common plastics, polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, PVC, you name it. Manufacturers basically melt these pellets down and mold them into pretty much everything plastic we use.
Right.
Bottles, packaging, kids' toys, even fibers for clothes. They're a huge part of the global plastic supply chain.
Right, I see. So they're the building blocks. But why are they such a big problem if they spill into the environment? I mean, they're not a finished product with extra chemicals yet, are they?
Yeah, that's a fair question. But even though they're just the raw material, the sources really emphasize that they're still a dangerous pollutant. Their small size is a major issue. They spread incredibly easily, contaminating huge areas, land and sea. And the worst part, they stick around. They persist for ages. Over time, sunlight and waves break them down into even smaller microplastics and then nanoplastics, which are almost impossible to clean up. Plus, they float, and marine life often mistakes them for food, little fish eggs or something. So they get into the food chain, building up in fish, seabirds, and eventually, potentially in us. And it's not just the physical harm of ingestion. They can also act like sponges, absorbing other toxic pollutants from the water and then releasing them if eaten. So this incident in Kerala really highlights how risky their transport can be.
Wow. So the key point is that these tiny, seemingly harmless pellets are a major environmental hazard right from the start of the plastic life cycle, not just at the end when we throw things away. This is super relevant for understanding pollution, coastal ecosystems, and maybe even regulations around shipping potentially hazardous materials.
Exactly. Okay, so from environmental challenges, let's move to the excitement of, well, pure discovery. There's some really great news coming out of the Himalayas.
A new plant species, Pedicularis rajeshiana. That's cool. Whereabouts did they find this one?
This new species was found way up in the western Himalayas, specifically around the Rohtang Pass area in Himachal Pradesh. It was spotted at a pretty remarkable altitude, 4,390 meters. That's really high up, growing in these small, scattered patches on shaded, rocky slopes. It belongs to a group of plants known as louseworts. And what's quite fascinating about many of these, including this new one, is that they're hemiparasitic.
Hemiparasitic, meaning they sort of borrow from other plants but aren't fully dependent.
That's right. They tap into the roots of neighboring plants to get some water and nutrients, but they also have green leaves and do their own photosynthesis. It's a clever survival strategy for tough, high-altitude conditions. And this discovery wasn't just random. It was part of a larger, systematic survey by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and the Botanical Survey of India. They're working on this huge project, the Flora of India.
Ah, so a planned effort yielding results. What makes finding this particular Pedicularis species significant?
Well, it adds another piece of the puzzle of the incredible biodiversity in that region. India already has, I think, 83 known species of Pedicularis, and a big chunk of those, 36, are found just in the western Himalayas. Many are endemic, too, meaning they don't grow anywhere else in the world. So discoveries like Pedicularis rajeshiana really underscore how much unique biodiversity is still out there waiting to be documented, especially in these ecologically sensitive high-altitude zones. And interestingly, the sources mention some Pedicularis species have traditional uses, like as muscle relaxants. This new one is apparently quite striking, described as looking like flowering flames of red in early spring.
Flowering flames of red, that really paints a picture. So the takeaway here is the crucial role of these systematic ecological surveys in understanding and hopefully conserving our unique biodiversity, particularly in places like the Himalayas that hold so many secrets. Ties right into biodiversity, conservation, and the value of scientific fieldwork.
Definitely. Now, staying in the high altitudes, but focusing on a specific protected place. There's been some news about the Churdhar Wildlife Sanctuary. Apparently, the Forest Department there recently decided to put a hold on plans to start charging visitors an entry fee.
Okay, Churdhar Wildlife Sanctuary, where exactly is that?
It's in the Sirmur district of Himachal Pradesh, located in the Shivalik Range. It was set up back in 1985, covers about 56 square kilometers, and it actually encircles the very prominent Churdhar Peak, sometimes called Churdhar. And that peak itself is pretty notable. It's actually the highest point in the outer Himalayas. They say from the top you get these incredible panoramic views. You can see the Gangetic Plain stretching out, the Satluj River, and even look north towards Badrinath on a clear day. There's also a major temple dedicated to Lord Shiva right on the peak, so it's a pilgrimage destination too. From an ecological perspective, the sanctuary is known for its diversity of medicinal plants. Things like wild Himalayan cherry, aloe vera, Amaranthus spinosus grow there, alongside dominant trees like oak and deodar. And for wildlife, it's home to species like musk deer, black bears, the beautiful Himalayan monal pheasant, and leopards.
So it's a really significant spot. Natural beauty, ecological value, cultural importance, all rolled into one. And this news about the user charge, even just putting it on hold, points to that ongoing debate, doesn't it? How to balance protecting these areas with allowing public access and sustainable tourism. The key thing for you is knowing about these important geographical spots and the management issues they face, relevant for geography, environment studies, and maybe even tourism policy questions.
Precisely. Okay, now let's really take a deep dive, like deep into geological time, billions of years deep. There's been a really fascinating discovery also in Himachal Pradesh, but further south this time in Chambakat near Solan. They unearthed these ancient structures dating back 600 million years. They're called stromatolites.
Stromatolites, wow, 600 million years, that's incredibly old. What exactly are these things and how can they be sure about the age?
Okay, so stromatolites are basically fossilized microbial mats. Think of them as organosedimentary structures. What that means is they're formed layer by layer as sediment, usually calcium carbonate, gets trapped and bound together by sticky mats of microorganisms, mostly algae and cyanobacteria. They typically form in shallow seas, and you can see these characteristic thin layers like rings in a tree almost. And their age is just staggering. They were super common back in the Precambrian era, that's anything before about 542 million years ago. Some of the oldest evidence for life on Earth actually comes from stromatolites that are over 2.5 billion years old. Living ones today are incredibly rare, only found in a few extreme places like hypersaline lakes where other organisms can't easily graze on the microbes. Now, the ones found at Champagat are located within sedimentary rocks known as the Kroll group. These rocks were originally laid down in the shallow waters of the ancient Tethys Sea, back when this whole region was part of the supercontinent Gondwana. Then, when the Indian plate collided with Eurasia, the collision that formed the Himalayas, those immense tectonic forces crumpled up these ancient seafloor sediments, including the stromatolites, and lifted them thousands of meters into the mountains.
So finding them high in the Himalayas is literally like finding ancient seabed fossils lifted to the roof of the world. That's amazing. But why are they considered so significant, beyond just being incredibly old?
Oh, their significance is huge. They're like little time capsules, offering windows into what ancient Earth was like. They record conditions from a time when the atmosphere was totally different, probably high in greenhouse gases, almost no oxygen. They tell this incredible story of lost oceans, continents drifting, and the sheer scale of geological time. And, maybe most importantly, those really ancient stromatolites, the ones going back maybe 3.5 billion years. The cyanobacteria that built them were doing photosynthesis, and over millions and millions of years, they're credited with pumping out enough oxygen to fundamentally change Earth's atmosphere, eventually making it breathable for complex life like us. They literally helped create the conditions for life as we know it. India actually has several other cool spots where stromatolites have been found, according to the sources, places like Chitrakoot, Morni Hills up near Chandigarh, around Mussoorie and Nainital, the Jaisalmer Fossil Park, and in very old rock formations like the Darwar Supergroup and Biva Basin down south.
That is just mind-blowing. Tiny microbes building structures that help shape the entire planet's atmosphere, and we find the evidence pushed up into the Himalayas. The key takeaway here is how these geological finds unlock Earth's deep history, the origins of life, the power of plate tectonics, and it highlights these really significant geological sites within India, connects directly to geology, paleontology, and Earth systems science.
Absolutely. Okay, moving from the incredibly deep past to incredible feats of modern human endurance, particularly on mountain peaks. We've got news about the 7 Summits Challenge. A teenager from Hyderabad has recently achieved something quite remarkable, becoming the youngest Indian and actually the second youngest person in the world ever to complete this challenge.
The 7 Summits Challenge, right? That's climbing the highest peak on each of the 7 continents. That sounds like an absolutely immense undertaking.
It really is. The challenge, which was first properly defined and completed by a guy named Richard Bass back in 1985, involves scaling the highest point on each continent. So the list usually includes Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, Mount Elbrus in Europe, Aconcagua in South America. Then there's a bit of a choice, either Kosciuszko in Australia or Puncak Jaya over in Oceania, Mount Vincent in Antarctica, and of course the big one, Mount Everest in Asia. Yeah, it's worth noting there are technically 2 main lists people follow. The Bass's list includes Kosciuszko, which is the highest point on mainland Australia. The Messner list, named after Reinhold Messner, includes Puncak Jaya in Indonesia, often considered the highest peak in the broader Oceania region. Most climbers tend to go for the Bass list, but some hardcore mountaineers try to do both.
An incredible test of physical and mental limits. The insight here is really about human achievement on a global scale, and it links directly to geography and knowing the highest points on each continent and the extreme physical challenges of high-altitude mountaineering. Relevant for geography, obviously, but also human potential and resilience.
Definitely. Right, shifting focus now to a really critical issue in public health within India. The National Academy of Medical Sciences, or NAMS, has just released a pretty significant report.
And this report is highlighting a major problem in India's cancer care, you said. What's the specific critical gap they've pointed out?
Yes, the NAM's report really zeroes in on a critical gap concerning the lack or inadequacy of diagnostic services for cancer across the country.
Okay, before we get into the report's findings, maybe just quickly, what exactly is NAMS? What role does it play?
Sure. NAMS is basically one of India's top medical institutions. Its main job is to promote academic excellence in medicine, geared towards achieving national medical and social goals. It actually started back in 1961 as the Indian Academy of Medical Sciences, then got renamed NAMS in '76. It acts as a key nodal agency for the government,
provides advice on things like national health policy and planning, and it supports medical education and spreading new knowledge, even using things like telelinkages and the National Knowledge Network. So this specific NAMS task force report focused on breast cancer statistics in India, and it lays out some really stark data. India sees roughly 200,000 new cancer cases diagnosed each year. Asia as a whole carries a huge burden globally, something like 50% of all cases and nearly 60% of cancer deaths worldwide. Within that, India ranks third globally in the number of cases, behind only China and the U.S. And the projections are worrying. They estimate India's cancer burden could hit 2.08 million cases annually by 2040. That's a projected increase of over 57% compared to 2020 levels.
Those are massive numbers, clearly indicating a rapidly growing challenge. And what did the report say specifically about breast cancer?
Breast cancer stands out as the most common cancer among women in India, and it's also a leading cause of cancer-related deaths for women here. The report notes something interesting. Compared to high-income countries, a higher proportion of Indian patients are diagnosed at a younger age. But here's the really critical finding for the report. Indian patients tend to present with much later stage disease. Over 60% of breast cancer patients in India are diagnosed at stage 3 or stage 4, when the cancer is more advanced and harder to treat. Now compare that to somewhere like the U.S., where roughly 60% are diagnosed much earlier at stage 1, or even in situ, which is very early stage. And this delay in getting diagnosed is a huge factor. The report mentions that over half, more than 50% of patients in India delay seeking medical help for more than 3 months after noticing symptoms. This late presentation, combined potentially with delays or issues in accessing adequate treatment, is a major reason why survival rates for breast cancer in India are generally lower than in Western countries.
That difference in diagnosis timing is really the core issue highlighted, isn't it? The critical bottleneck identified by NMs isn't just about having enough treatment facilities, but about fundamental access to and timeliness of detection in the first place. This is vital for you to understand for public health challenges, the role of key institutions like NMs, and that complex mix of social factors, healthcare access, and disease statistics in India.
Exactly. Okay, moving on from health challenges to economic support for a really vital sector, agriculture. The Union Cabinet has recently given the green light for the continuation of the interest subvention component. This is part of the Modified Interest Subvention Scheme, or MIS-SS, and it's been extended for the financial year 2025-26.
Right, so it's about helping farmers financially. Can you break down what this Modified Interest Subvention Scheme, MIS-SS, actually does?
Sure. MIS-SS is a central sector scheme. Its main objective is pretty simple: to make short-term credit available to farmers at an affordable interest rate. And it mainly works through the Kisan Credit Card System, the KCC. So how it works is farmers can get short-term loans up to 3 lakh through their KCC. The interest rate they pay is subsidized down to 7%. To make this possible, the government provides an interest subvention of 1.5% directly to the banks and other lending institutions that offer these loans. The sources also mention there's some kind of incentive for farmers who repay their loans on time, although the specific details of that aren't given here. There's one specific detail to note. If the loan is taken exclusively for activities related to animal husbandry or fisheries, then this interest benefit applies for loans up to Rs 2 lakh, not 3 lakh. But the recent approval just continues this existing structure. They haven't proposed any changes to how the scheme works.
Okay, so it provides that crucial bit of financial breathing room with lower interest costs. Who's actually running this scheme on the ground?
It's implemented and monitored jointly by the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, and NABARD, the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. And the delivery happens through a whole network of banks: public sector banks, regional rural banks, cooperative banks, and even private sector banks participate, especially those operating in rural and semi-urban areas, to make sure it reaches the farmers who need it.
Got it. So the key insight here is the government's ongoing commitment to ensuring farmers have access to affordable credit through the KCC mechanism. It's a vital tool for supporting the agricultural sector, boosting the rural economy, and promoting financial inclusion. Understanding the scheme is relevant for government policies, agriculture economics, and the roles played by institutions like RBI and NABARD.
Definitely. All right, for the final topic in this part of our deep dive, let's end with something quite specific and actually pretty fascinating for the world of insects. There's a study out that highlights the significant benefits of using stingless bees for improving crop yield and quality.
Stingless bees, the name kind of gives it away. How are they different from the honeybees we usually think of?
Well, they look quite similar to regular honeybees, but yeah, as the name suggests, they can't really sting effectively. They technically have stingers, but they're greatly reduced. Basically too small to use for defense against anything bigger than, say, another insect. So if they feel threatened, they tend to bite using their mandibles instead.
So they're like the friendly neighborhood pollinators.
You could say that.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the main benefits the study points to. They can be used effectively for pollination, which, as you know, is absolutely essential for the production and quality of many fruits, vegetables, and other crops, but without the risk of nasty stings that you get with honeybees.
That seems like a pretty big practical advantage, especially maybe for certain types of farming or even gardening. Where do you typically find these bees?
There are actually quite a lot of them, around 550 known species across the globe. And they're related to other pollinators we know, like bumblebees and carpenter bees. Some common types, the genera, include names like Astroplabia, Melipona, and Tetragonula. They're mostly found in tropical and subtropical regions, so across Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia, and the Americas. In India, they're mainly reported from the northeastern states, as well as parts of the east and south. And apparently in the Northeast, there's a tradition of people keeping them in small, sort of backyard apiaries. Oh, and the sources also mention their honey, stingless bee honey, where SPH is considered quite special, maybe high value. It's shown beneficial properties too, like being antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and potentially even having neurotherapeutic and neuroprotective effects.
Wow, so it's not just about the pollination. Their honey might have medicinal value too. That's really interesting. The takeaway here seems to be how these specific, maybe often overlooked species like stingless bees can play a really important role both ecologically through pollination and potentially offer economic and health benefits through their products, relevant for agriculture, biodiversity, and maybe even traditional knowledge systems.
We've certainly covered a lot of ground in this first part, haven't we? Quite a mix. From the subtle manipulations of dark patterns online to the very real environmental threat from tiny plastic nurdles. The thrill of discovering a new species high in the Himalayas, decoding Earth's incredibly ancient history through stromatolites, celebrating human endurance on the world's highest peaks, grappling with those critical public health gaps in cancer care, understanding how government schemes support agriculture, and even finding surprising little helpers in farming like stingless bees. And jumping between these very topics, trying to draw connections, pulling out the core ideas from the sources. That's exactly the kind of mental exercise that builds the broad, comprehensive understanding you really need for your preparation.
It really is. And, if you just pause for a second, you can almost see a thread connecting some of these. Think about how our actions today, like the pollution from nurdles or the healthcare systems we design or fail to design adequately, as highlighted by that NAM's report, they all leave a mark. Just like those ancient stromatolites left a physical record of Earth's early atmosphere billions of years ago. It's kind of a humbling reminder, isn't it, about the interconnectedness of deep time, human society today, and the natural world. How seemingly separate news items can actually reflect these bigger, fundamental connections. Now remember, this was just part one of our deep dive into today's essential current affairs. There's definitely more to cover. So to make absolutely sure you don't miss part two, and of course all our future deep dives covering topics crucial for your UPSC journey, please do take a moment right now, just hit that like button if you found this useful, and definitely subscribe to the channel. Your support really does help us keep bringing you these detailed insights.
Yeah, and maybe think about how some of the challenges we talked about today, like the environmental pollution or the healthcare access issues, they really demand systemic solutions, don't they? Solutions that involve policy, technology, human behavior, connecting right back to the kinds of systems and structures we discussed in some of these sources.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you again very soon with part two.